Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the National Security Team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the Vice Commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
Massive story. The New York Times has admitted it. And we really have to question why this story is coming out. It's the secret history of the U.S. involvement in the Ukraine war. And in fact, it's worse. It's even worse than we could have possibly predicted. Because, you see, here's what's going on. Well, we were told all along, unprovoked war, unprovoked war, unprovoked war. But as it turns out, the U.S. military has not only been involved prior to the Ukraine war, but even during the Ukraine war. And there's this huge piece out now in the New York Times. This is actually a huge, it's kind of a CYA piece, because the big piece of this is that this war is coming to an end. It did not go the way that the globalists wanted. It did not go the way that the neoliberals wanted. Russia looks like they're going to be getting these provinces. And so all of the things that were said at the beginning were lies, as were called out by us here on Human Events Daily, to the posse and others. And so this is pre-shaping the legacy of the Ukraine war, to say, oh, it wasn't our fault. See, we tried to help, but it was Zelensky's fault. It was Zelensky's fault, the Ukrainians' fault. They just didn't listen. They didn't take our advice. So what's come out in the New York Times today? This massive story. It's, I don't even, 10,000 words. 10,000 word story about how the U.S. military, the U.S. intelligence services, and the U.S. government have been directing the Ukraine war from the very start, supplying the coordinates of Russian forces on Russian soil from a U.S. base in Wiesbaden, Germany. So a U.S. base in Germany, that means U.S. generals, U.S. soldiers, U.S. officials, U.S. officers were giving the targets to the Ukrainians on Russian soil, and then the Russians were the ones who were the recipient of the strikes. That's way more than the material support that we knew that was publicly going on, but it's exactly what we told you. In fact, there's even one point where they talk about how General Milley was specifically involved in planning operations for the Ukrainian military. But of course, it was just advising. What did we even find out? That yes, of course, there were U.S. troops on the ground in Ukraine the entire time. U.S. troops are on the ground in Kiev as well as in forward positions. That's why this thing has gone so far. That's why I've been hearing about all of this. And that's why the negotiations currently are between the United States, Russia, and Ukraine, because the U.S. role in this is larger than anyone has officially confirmed up until this point. We'll be right back. Human Events Daily.
The Ukraine war, folks. Things have never been what they told us they were. Welcome back to More War Monday. The Rob Maness Show's live on Worldview Tube, our X Spaces simulcast, Rumble, YouTube, Truth Social Plus, Amazon Fire, Apple TV, and Roku. Well, most of us who've followed the events in Ukraine, Russia's responses, and American involvement in the country have been saying what the New York Times finally published after millions of dead. Let that sink in. Millions. That the United States has indeed been fighting an all-out proxy war against Russia using the Ukraine armed forces as our military. We've had American boots on the ground, and American generals have been calling the shots. The concept that Russia's invasion in 2022 was unprovoked was and still is a complete and total lie. The reality is we and NATO have wasted time, resources, and lives. And now we have a new Trump administration, and the president ran on ending this war. But can we do it when behind the scenes our own national security apparatus is likely fighting against that peace process? We have now been very clear that the U.S. priorities are focused on defense of the homeland and turning to deterring China with a peace through strength approach, but not everyone agrees. Dangerously, sitting full colonel level commanders are publicly opposing President Trump's foreign policies. Our Department of Defense and intelligence organization leaders are in open rebellion, while the new administration is still trying to get up and running. What has happened to the nonpartisan nature of America's national security professionals? Well, my friend L. Todd Wood is joining us today to discuss these circumstances and these issues. He's a former special operations pilot, helicopter pilot, I might add, and I'm going to ask him about what happened this weekend in New York at some point. He's also the CEO of CDM Press. He's on a mission to report the truth, and as America's free press should be, to protect our way of life. But, of course, the other part of the free press, the corporate part, is not. Todd, welcome back to the Rob Maness Show.
Always love to be on, Rob. Thank you for the invite. I was excited when I got the text. Thank you.
Well, one of your outlets, Armed Forces Press, I believe it was, published a great analysis article of the New York Times analysis article, which really wasn't analysis. They just decided they'd print what they have known for years. And and one of the things that I tout about your ops, Todd, is that you have people on the ground where you report from, where your teams report from. So you have folks on the ground in Ukraine and in this area, and you've been there many times over the years and worked there. So why does the New York Times think that the American people can be surprised by this late breaking? I mean, I tweeted out, what took you so long when they finally published it?
Well, this is obviously some kind of disclosure procedure, limited hangout kind of thing. I think it's probably even worse than what we know there. You know, we reported, we've been reporting since 2019 on what's going on in Ukraine. And 5 years later, we did a story on Hunter Biden was using the State Department and the American ambassador in Italy to close deals in Romania for the Biden crime family. The New York Times published that last week, so 5 years later. But this story is, I think, we knew what was going on, but not to the extent. You know, I published a story a couple years ago. I knew there were mercs inside Ukraine, American mercenaries. And I had a guy tell me to my face at outside of MacDill, the SOF base, or is it Tyndall? Which one is over there by Tampa? I'm forgetting the name of the base now. But
MacDill.
MacDill, right? So, that guy told me, we were at the bar, and he's like, "Look, I stopped counting at 500 Russians that I killed." I mean, and you could see in the eyes the guy was telling the truth. And so I knew what was going on over there. I just didn't know the extent that it was such high up in the food chain, actually running the war on the ground at the battlefield level, telling commanders to keep running through that trench and go to that next foxhole and, take that next position to that extent, screaming on the phone. And yes, we had Pete Blaber, who's a Delta Force commander, who's one of our prime contributors on Ukraine, has a lot of experience also. And Pete has been really, as you mentioned, his article on armedforces.press, really laying out some quality analysis. For a long time now, we've been talking about Ukraine. We've been doing a tour all around the country. I actually testified to the House Oversight attorneys on this issue, on the corruption, national security corruption there, and U.S. Americans corruption. And so I'm glad to see it come out. But what took you so long is one, I guess, response, but also, why haven't all this reporting we've been doing for 5 years got any traction? To the American people should be aware of this.
Yeah. I was curious as to, what does that say about our country when, you've been out there, my outlet's been talking about it. I mean, my goodness, we've been talking about this really even before 2019 on social media. When Putin went into Crimea is when I first really started focusing on it and talking about it every week. I mean, just the big question is, what does it say about us? But one of the things, in your article, your team's article and Pete's article there, he talks about overseeing the kill chain.
Yeah.
Now that I didn't realize that we were at that level where we're overseeing
that's
the
my
entire
point.
kill chain process.
Yeah, that's my point. All the way down to the ground. I mean, literally, it's worse than Vietnam. You hear the stories of McNamara picking targets and all that kind of stuff in Vietnam, but this is worse than that. This is like McNamara, picking the bombs and which airplanes are going to have which bombs and what their flight path is going to be, and like literally all the way down. And you and I have talked about this a lot. There has to be accountability here. I mean, I cannot believe this was all done legally, constitutionally. I don't think Biden had any clue what was going on, and I hope we can get some accountability for these very, very senior military officers. I mean, we just put on armedforces.press General Cavoli and General Langley, who spoke in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee last week. And, Cavoli is sitting there saying, Ukraine's doing great. The Russian army's, diminished and Ukraine's getting better every day. I mean, that's just a complete lie. And Cavoli he's the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. And he was the one in that Wiesbaden C2 cell with pictures of him, with Zaluzny looking over maps. So, I mean, the guy's delusional. I mean, you literally have organized crime at the head of our military, in my opinion, at this point, because there's no other explanation for this kind of behavior.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Wiesbaden. Why is Wiesbaden the central location for the C2 node for the Americans?
Well, it had to be in Europe. It's probably, I don't know, maybe there's logistical reasons for it. Today it could be in Omaha if it wanted to. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but I think Europe was probably just closer to the whole chain, and so they put them there, and then there's an air base there, and you can get in and out. You can talk to the NATO members. It's probably more convenience and closeness of coordination than anything, but I don't think there's anything particular about that base. I just think that that they were involved. And there's another story that came out, I think it was the Times came out this week, and we were talking about that with Pete this morning, that the European or the British generals were in there on the ground directing the Kursk incursion, the spring offensive a couple years ago that failed. All of this failed radically, by the way. Yeah. So either these people are very incompetent or they were on a mission to do something else, is to expend American ordnance, keep us tied up in a war for China, in my opinion. I think these people were bought and paid off. I can't prove that. But to me, why would you act like this? What's the upside for America other than your career and getting money?
Yeah, to have 2 4-stars that they really know the terrain. I mean, they know the terrain, they know the intelligence like the back of their hand. They have these huge staffs. We've been on them before in that kind of work and everything. So they know the truth.
Yeah, sure.
And to be able to come out, get under oath in front of Congress, and continue to tell the propaganda story and the lies, it just blows me away. And we're going to get into the whole officer corps thing a little bit too today. But how many boots on the ground, Americans and NATO troops, do you think we really have had there all this time? I mean, I'll be honest with you. I thought it was probably a couple hundred Americans, uniform types, and probably a couple hundred CIA type operatives and those kind of things. Maybe throw in the USAID guys and that kind of stuff, State Department people, and have another couple hundred. But I'm getting the sense that there's a sizable enough force there that it's at least 2 large ground units.
Well, what's been going on in the U.S., you've had all these cutouts, right? These NGOs that are doing the dirty work of our intelligence agencies and whatever, USAID, whatever. It's 3 or 4 degrees of separation always. It's probably something like that. I know there were a lot of mercenaries there. I sat in a room with retired special ops guys who were telling me about this stuff. And this was 2 years ago or 3 years ago. So this was in 2022. So I know that there's been in force at least a large number of U.S. mercenaries on the ground there for years. I think you can combine that with the British force. I think there's a large British contingent there. Their whole military is smaller than the U.S. Marine Corps, but they have decided to deploy massive amount of resources into Ukraine. Why is that? There's some other agenda going on. Hopefully at some point we'll know what it is. But I think you're right. I think if you include the mercenaries, which are essentially, U.S. personnel just wearing a different shirt, that I think you're probably right about the size.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we got to take a break, Todd. When we come back, we'll dive into the ceasefire process and the peace process. I want to get your thoughts on what's really going on over there, because as we've talked about behind the scenes, something is wrong. I have a sense of it, and I want to see what your thoughts are. We'll be right back with L. Todd Wood of CDM Press talking about Ukraine and other issues associated with the collapse, really, of what looks like the collapse of potentially of the United States Armed Forces officer. We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Would you like to gain access to over 20 years of my radio shows, TV shows, my books? I've written 15 books, and most of those books are ebooks now. And we have conference DVDs, conferences where we filmed our conferences at the Ozarks, literally starting 20 years ago. It's all available in our archived vault. All you have to do is go to worldviewtube.com/vault, worldviewtube.com/vault, and for a reasonable monthly fee, you gain access to over 20 years of Christian worldview programming, news, information, books, documentaries, and a powerful search engine. And folks, it's a great way not only to educate yourself, equip yourself, but it's a big way that you can help fund our continuation as a broadcast network. Please check it out. worldviewtube.com/vault, worldviewtube.com/vault, and help us continue pushing out a Christian worldview.
Kevin, we do know there are a host of sanctions on Russia. There have been questions about actual enforcement of them across administrations.
That is correct. And we need to remember the only reason we're even having this conversation about bringing this war to a conclusion is because of Donald Trump. And I would speculate that the reason that tariffs have not been put on Russia from last week's announcement is because President Trump and Secretary Rubio are trying to maximize the leverage they have over them. And it may be that part of that leverage, Shannon, is doing a better job than the Biden administration of enforcing those sanctions. I still expect this war to come to a conclusion in a way that's satisfactory for the everyday American, most importantly. But to the point about the Europeans, I just have to say, if they want to stay in the American defense umbrella, they need to pull their own weight and stop wagging their finger about us spending our money that's hard-earned by the everyday American. And I'm really grateful to the Trump administration for resetting that.
Welcome back to the Rob Maida Show. It's More War Monday, and we're talking about Ukraine again, unfortunately, and how things have never been what they told us they were and never are what they appear to be in places like the media. There, Kevin Robertson there was of the Heritage Foundation was being very straight about that. My guest today is L. Todd Wood of CDM Press, and Todd, Kevin's right. He's the President Trump is the only reason why we have an opportunity in this war that even may even be halfway, not even halfway favorable, but somewhat favorable to the Ukrainians in that they'll still be able to exist.
Well, the people need to understand that are watching your show that there is a massive effort by the people inside the U.S. military and national security establishment and the Ukrainian regime that really don't want this war to end. And you've had multiple examples of that showing itself just over the last few days. I mean, yesterday you had what was put in the mainstream media that it was a Russian attack during Palm Sunday in Sumy, which is right on the Ukrainian-Russian border on the Ukraine side. Well, what was the real story? The real story is that Zelensky decided and his regime decided to do an award ceremony for hundreds of soldiers right on the Russian border out in the middle of this civilian town. And they said, oh, yeah, bring your children to watch. And then that was leaked to the Russians. So the Russians had a target, right on the border, inside the war zone of hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers, and it was a target they fired on. and they killed a lot of people. But the truth is that was, in the words of our source on the ground in Kiev, engineered by the Zelensky regime to create a crisis in order to keep the U.S. in the war, to keep the funding coming, to keep the military equipment coming, and to stop the peace negotiations, because Russia, killed a lot of civilians on Palm Sunday. Well, you don't talk. You got to tell the whole truth, right? That who in their right mind would have a celebration on the border out in the open during the day and have it announced to the world of a grouping of Ukrainian soldiers? So, and there's videos online of the locals screaming and cursing at the local government for allowing this to happen. They don't blame the Russians. They blame their own leaders. And so there's example after example like this. Zelensky today is like, Trump, come to Ukraine and see the Russians and really what they're doing. And so, and then the press, the massive narrative Mockingbird media press, to continue to provide reasons of why this war needs to keep going is almost overwhelming. I hope that Trump, has the ability to face it and to stare it down, because I'm worried about a lot of the people around him. I don't know if he's getting good advice. So far, so good, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing some internal rumblings, rumor intelligence at this point. Nothing confirmed there, that there's at least one individual that's fucking around and slowing the process down. And that is not a good thing. If the president's got confidence in these people, then they should be following his guidance and his orders, And, when I saw that Palm Sunday story, I knew immediately, because I've been watching Zelensky this whole time. I mean, all the way from the, you remember when they shot the S-400 and it landed in Poland. He tries to say it's a Russian missile attack on Poland. All of those things, whether it's planned or unplanned, and they take a target of opportunity. Zelensky has always come down on the side of trying to do something to pull NATO or the United States into the shooting aspect of the war. Of course, the U.S. has been there the whole time with our command structure. It's basically just got the Ukrainian our military as our armed forces, essentially. I think that's
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I was going to say,
I think that's one of the reasons why they want to keep it going, is because our generals, they're getting resources that they wouldn't probably otherwise get out of that on their budgets.
Yeah, sure. And career and, jobs afterwards, plum jobs on the board of wherever. But you got to realize these people, and including the Americans, have no problem over the last 3 years killing a few million people. So they're not going to care about a few dozen civilians, even if they're children, if it furthers their goal to stay in power. Because, they cannot lose power in Ukraine. If they lose power in Ukraine, that is the crown jewel of the EU experiment, of the globalist experiment. And, they're trying to make it into some kind of new Garden of Eden in the middle of Europe with all the resources. That's the eventual goal, I think, is to depopulate Ukraine and take it over. And they don't care about killing people. So they're backed into a corner. They're not doing well. Their agenda's failing. And I think the American security establishment, the blob, if you will, is all in with Zelensky to try to keep this war going, and probably advising him on a lot of this stuff, like the Sumy attack, like all the other comments. Today he came out and said, J.D. Vance is taking Russia's, propaganda. How long are they going to bring up the Russia hoax again? How many times can that be recycled, the rinse and repeat? So I hope these rumors you hear are not great, or not, but there's always the too good to check kind of rumor. So
yeah,
good enough.
Yeah, especially when you're not hearing from the people that you're hearing about in public anymore, but they're still there. Yes. When they're silent publicly, and you hear a rumor like, well, so and so is mucking up the process because of this or that, probably closer to the truth, and I think the American generals are absolutely guiding Zelensky. They probably we probably gave advice at some level on that ceremony,
I would not doubt.
Those people, everybody involved in that, and it's my understanding Zelensky approved it, has to be held accountable. They all have to be held accountable. That's a war crime because you know that in a combat zone, your enemy is going to attack a military target, and 200 soldiers is a military target. 200 soldiers out in the open in broad daylight is a military target, no matter who else is there or what else is there.
Completely
and the decision
agree.
that put that into play are the ones to be held accountable. Oh my gosh! And you know, I don't like Vladimir Putin. I didn't agree with him invading in the first place. I'm on record saying that. I was wrong about it. I didn't think he was going to, but I don't agree with it. But that's not the point when you're talking about the specifics of an incident like this Palm Sunday attack and everything. The point is, where are the ethics? Why are we dealing with such a corrupt establishment in that country? And three, our hands are more bloody than theirs because we have the power to stop it. The people in uniform that are continuing this on the American side, they have the power to stop this and stop it right now. You know. Well,
General Cavoli, he's the American commander in Europe. He's the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. He could go to the president and say, we want to end this tomorrow. We're endangering our own weapons stores, our own combat capability. We're spread too thin. We need to end this tomorrow, sir. So let's make a deal with the Ukrainians and the Russians. He could do that, but no, he's in front of the Armed Services Committee saying, "Oh, Ukraine's fine. The army's gotten really sophisticated. We destroyed 4,000 tanks." He didn't say how many tanks Ukraine had lost in Kursk alone, including 70,000 soldiers of their best men in Kursk alone, and I would bet many of them were American and British. So we'll see.
That Kursk operation has never had, in my mind, a valid strategic, operational, or even tactical objective. Well, let's take a question from the audience before we go to this break, Todd. Go ahead, Rob, is our host over there. Rob, who's up?
We have Colonel Burton.
Hey, Todd, thank you for being on the show. Probably the most important discussion going. Quick question is, can you put some meat on the bone about like the Ukrainian money laundering operation that's been funneling money to basically the Western elites and kind of sustaining the whole thing? Obviously, we know about the defense spending, and weapons stuff, but then there's just been flat cash that's going in there. And where's that money been going? Can you talk to that?
Yeah, I can. In 2019 and 2020, I spent a lot of time in Ukraine, and I was sitting with a source in a room with a couple other guys who used to work in the prosecutor's office in Kiev, and they started pulling out files and showing me diagrams of money laundering carousels that they had taken from the prosecutor's office because they were afraid the evidence was going to be destroyed. We printed all this on cdm.press. If you go to our investigative section, in fact, there's a tab atop cdm.press Ukraine files, and you can see some of the stuff there. You can see that image there, one of them. And basically what they were doing is money would come into the central bank from the U.S. These guys would sell it to an affiliated broker-dealer that one of the oligarchs owned. They'd sell it, I'm a bond guy, so they'd sell it if the bond's trading at 100, they'd sell it at 97 to the broker-dealer. Broker-dealer would sell it back to the bank at par. So that's 3% they would pocket and send somewhere offshore or whatever. This was happening under Poroshenko to hundreds of millions of dollars. And I think it just all went on steroids. But it's essentially a carousel of money coming from the U.S. Treasury, through Ukraine, and not just for money laundering, but also targeting political candidates in the U.S., including Bernie Sanders and then Donald Trump for the Hillary Clinton, matrix back in the first term. Prior to the first term. So all this has been going on. I call it the organized crime playground. They can do whatever they want. There's no oversight. All the corruption bureaus, the anti-corruption bureaus, were set up by the Soros, engine to find corruption, to prevent corruption from being prosecuted and discovered. And this goes all the way back to Paul Manafort, who was kicked out of the Trump campaign. I wrote in 2016 in the Washington Times that evidence was all false because I just talked to those guys. I knew. I called them on the phone the day that came out, the Black Ledger, and I said, "Where'd you get this?" I was just there. And the PO of the corruption, the NABU, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, Svetlana, she said, "Oh, we just got that off the internet. Somebody just gave that to us." I was like, and so Trump's campaign manager is losing his job for something you just pulled off the internet? I mean, really amazing. So the corruption is deep, and it includes bribes to the FBI. It includes State Department corruption. Go down the list. The ambassador, everything.
You didn't even mention the Burisma laptop from Hunter Biden. We got to take another break.
Yeah. I was in the middle of that too. I can tell you about that if you want.
There's so much. There's so much there, and it's all there. There's very little of this stuff that's false. But nobody wants to take the right action on it. They would rather go with the false Russia collusion hoax thing. Todd, well, we'll be right back, and we'll hear from Putin in the opening clip coming back in about his perspective just a couple of days ago. We'll be right back with Todd Wood of the CDM Press.
But with Brandon, it's always cutting edge stuff happening in the world, and it's not just from the political angle, because you can get that on other platforms, but it's always from the biblical angle. So you're dealing with a guy that loves Jesus, you're dealing with a guy that's very intelligent, you're dealing with a guy that is cutting edge conservatism, and you're dealing with a guy that wants to be biblical all at the same time. And so for that reason alone, I hope many, many people will not just lift up his ministry in prayer, but will also financially get behind it, because from the angle I'm trying to describe, he really is the only game in town. And we desperately need it in these last days. Can I get an amen to that?
Hand on heart, US envoy Steve Witkoff seemed eager to flatter his host at the start of his second meeting with President Putin since Donald Trump's ceasefire proposal. But 4 weeks on, Russia remains determined to dictate the direction of travel as the world waits for its answer. Vladimir Putin's focus perhaps clearer earlier as he met Navy commanders in St. Petersburg. One of our priorities is to strengthen the Russian Navy, he told them, strategic and nuclear forces. But President Trump's growing frustration at the Kremlin's slow response to his efforts to end the war in Ukraine is becoming clear. Russia has to get moving, he wrote in a post today. Too many people were dying, thousands a week, in a terrible and senseless war. In Brussels, the Ukraine Defence Contact Group met, co-chaired by Britain's Defence Secretary John Healey. They pledged more than £18 billion in military funding for Ukraine.
And so today at this Ukraine Contact Group, we step up our support for Ukraine in the fight. And our job as defence ministers is to get urgent military aid into the hands of Ukrainian war fighters.
But missing in action, in person at least for the family photo, was US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth. He spoke via video link, but at the last gathering he warned America's priorities lay elsewhere.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's More War Monday here on Worldview Tube in this show, and we're talking about Ukraine and asking the question, why is nothing ever as we are told or that it seems in this war with Ukraine? And my guest is L. Todd Wood, the CEO of CDM Press, and they had a great article on their armedforces.press outlet a few weeks ago about that New York Times confession. I'll call it a confession, Todd. It's the confession, finally, I think. One of the things that is mentioned in the article a couple of times is how the U.S. CIA really is responsible for almost all of the big successes. Either the CIA or the intelligence apparatus with the targeting intelligence has been the ones responsible for this. But here's my question is, why is the Ukrainian American-trained armed forces failing then? If they have our high-quality so-called generals and staff, joint staff, wartime staff at EUCOM and NATO, all at their disposal, all of our gear, from all the NATO countries that are stepped up to participate. They have gear from all over the place. Why are they failing?
Well, first let me say that I don't want to disparage the bravery and the talent of the Ukrainian guys on the ground. We're all military men. We can respect, fighting for your country. And so I don't want to diminish them. But the leadership, just like in the U.S., is extremely corrupt. If you remember up in the north of Donbass when the Russians came in and took a lot of territory a few months back, there were supposed to have been massive defensive establishments built with minefields and all kind of defensive positions, and the Russians just walked in because nothing was built. The money just disappeared. So in Ukraine, corruption is an art form. I mean, it is literally embedded in the DNA of anyone in power and anyone that has money, and it's very rare to see people who will actually do the right thing once you get above a certain level, because to get to that level, you got to be corrupt. That's what I'm afraid that the U.S. military is turning into. So, why is the Ukrainian military not effective? I think a lot of it has to do with that. They're not there to win the war. They're not there for the people of Ukraine. They're there working for somebody else and to get as rich as they can in the meantime. And that is because they know, the oligarchs are playing both sides of each other. Akhmenatov and others there in Ukraine who have access to the resources in Donbass and on both sides of the border. It's gang warfare, and we've become one of the gangs. It's just like gangs of New York. And I've written many times. I used to write for the Washington Times, and I wrote back when Putin started rearming, I think around 2008, around the Georgia conflict. I think he looked at the U.S. Leadership, and he has very good intelligence. And I think he just realized these people are just as corrupt as me. I better rearm, or they're going to destroy me and take everything I have and all my people have. I think that's what happened, and it's really unfortunate. And the only way we get, in my view, a republic back is to admit our sins, if you will, and rebuild an ethical leadership and officer corps in the military and in our political class. And I don't know if that's doable, but that's the only way, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, especially for those of us like you and I that have served for so many decades, and a lot of our viewers have too. Let's take another question from the audience. Rob, go ahead.
We have Joseph Colonel.
Thank you very much, Colonel. My question is if this is being organized and run by American military personnel in the officer corps at the higher levels, coordinating with Britain and maybe several others like Germany and everything else, why has Trump not just recalled all these people? And if he didn't know, that itself would be an issue. So my question is, if this is still going on, if it's still ongoing, doesn't Trump have the purview to just in one fell swoop, with a sweep of a pen, say all this is over and I want everybody, sent home so that we could discuss it?
Well, I think that would be the desired outcome. I think he's fighting a battle internally. A lot of these, and he's also trying to negotiate with Russia, so he doesn't want to give away all his cards. He says it all the time. I'm going to put more sanctions on Russia, or it'll be difficult for them if they don't end this war. I think he's trying to keep the pressure on there, so maybe he doesn't want to take apart the apparatus that was applying the pressure in the beginning. I don't know. I can't answer. You could talk about election fraud, for instance. You could talk about, all the stuff in our food, the vaccines. You could go down the list and ask the same question. Why hasn't this just been a sweep of the pen and got rid of all this corruption and mass murder, essentially? So I can't answer that question. I'm hoping that there's a plan. I don't know if there is.
Yeah, I would just add to that. There is a certain amount of risk associated with cleaning house in the middle of war. But the other piece to it is, I think he just got General Kane, the new chairman, confirmed Friday, I think it was, or Saturday. So, my preference would be let's continue on. We're continuing with these peace negotiations, and let Kane get in there and make some evaluations of people. That's the first place I would be going to evaluate general officers and admirals, would be Europe, and into the Red Sea. into the Red Sea before I get focused on China.
You know, you and I, Rob, were instrumental in getting CQ Brown fired. I think that's a fact. I mean, we were very vocal on his need to go because it was pushing the DEI and all that stuff and literally being a DEI pusher. And we were very vocal about it in our news organizations. And I know that had a pressure. So free media is absolutely essential. So your audience, keep supporting this show and anywhere you find free media that you believe in, because that's the linchpin to saving the republic, because without it, we can't.
Yeah, I completely agree. Once we get the show posted, the post-production show posted, folks, send it over to Secretary Hegseth and the new Raising Cain, General Cain, chairman of the Joint Chiefs X account too. And by the way, share CDM Press's articles, Armed Forces Press. They've got, I don't know, how many outlets do you have now, Todd? 5?
We got 13. We're working on number 14. It's all connected into one network. We're global news without the globalist spin. We're literally a wire service with reporters on the ground from Kiev all the way, to Montana. So cdm.press is the site. Everything flows into there, but you can check everything out in the top menus.
Yeah. The officer corps discussion, I think, is important for us to have. You and I being Air Force officers, I came up from enlisted. You're an academy graduate. How concerned are you? And we'll have a little clip at the opening of the next segment about this Space Force Space Commander. But in general, how concerned are you at the efficacy and readiness and capability of America's officer corps across all the services? Now, I think the Marine Corps is a little bit better off than everybody else, from what I can tell. But I'm pretty concerned.
Well, I am too. Our Air Force, if you will, is in deep trouble. When I joined the 20th Special Operations Squadron, Colonel Rich Comer, he sat me down and said, "Captain, 3 things: be ready to go to war. I don't care about the paperwork. Just be ready to go fight tomorrow." And he said, "Number 2, don't screw around on your buddy's wife when he's deployed. And number 3, if you ever lie to me, I'll out-process you on the steps of the squadron. If you make a mistake, tell me, we'll fix it, but don't lie to me." I don't know where that went. I mean, that is gone, and we have to get that back somehow. I'm not sure how to do it.
Yeah, it's pretty devastating, really, to be honest with you. I don't know if you've been following what's coming out on the guidance to reinstate the officers and enlisted that were forced out over the COVID vaccine mandate, which Congress rescinded, and the president's given a direct order, and Secretary Hegseth has added to that order with his memo and everything. But the former officers that are now in senior executive service and the officers running the USD Personnel and Readiness Office and then the services, Manpower and Readiness Offices, I'm beginning to question what's really going on with those leadership teams under Secretary Hegseth. And I know he hasn't got his full appointees in there, but he's got some actings that weren't there originally, I don't think. But the bureaucratic staff below those folks, I think, is just they're putting in little landmines in their policy letters. And if you read anything from the folks that have been forced out that have been advocating on this issue, both through STARS and other outlets and those kind of things, and you've interviewed a bunch of them, most of them are saying that what's happening is the wrong thing to do. For instance, one of the service memos are saying that you have to serve for at least 4 years instead of the 2 that were required for previous types of ousters. They're saying that you have to sign up to say you weren't coerced. Well, everybody was coerced, even people that were given discharges because of the vaccine or got out and left because they were going to get punished. Was coerced. I mean, what the heck is going on with that? We got to go to the next segment here in a minute, but I want to get into that piece of it. And I want to get into this, the officers that are commanders, like this Space Force Base colonel that was just fired over the weekend. We're going to see a little clip, news report about her coming into this next segment. But the piece that I want to talk with you about is getting selected for command and the influence that process and those individuals that are selected for command can have. If they're a colonel commander, they've got a lot of influence both to the future and the past from that position. We'll be right back with L. Todd Wood of CDM Press.
All right, we are
The commander in charge of America's Bidefik Space Force base in Greenland was let go on Thursday after it was revealed that she sent a base-wide email denouncing the words of Vice President J.D. Vance during his recent visit to the base. Vance, in March, went to the base to discuss the national security imperatives of Greenland and the U.S. interest there. He spent a portion of his speech criticizing Denmark, which has sovereignty over Greenland, for failing to provide enough security to Greenland as increasing competition from Russia and China grows in the Arctic. The commander, Colonel Susanna Myers, said that his words did not reflect the opinion of Bidefik and said that as long as she was commander of the base, the Danish and U.S. flags would fly together at the same time on the base. The move was highly unusual for an officer of that caliber to speak out so publicly against the executive branch. It's often viewed as rebuking the commander-in-chief, who clearly here, President Trump, wants to create a partnership or even take over Greenland. The action was taken Thursday night by the Space Force, who said that they had lost confidence in her ability to lead.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's More War Monday, and we're talking about Ukraine, but we're also talking about the status of the United States Armed Forces Officer Corps, how that's interplayed in the reason the United States and NATO continue to waste lives, resources in the Ukraine-Russia war without appearing to pursue peace as their president has directed them to do. It's unbelievable. And Todd, this really stands out, this commander at the full colonel level in Greenland. We don't just put anybody in a full colonel command slot or even an 05 level, a squadron command slot. We don't just put people there. They're selected by boards of general officers and senior colonels in the squadron commanders board process. So we don't just put people in these positions for no good reason. The system has picked them. They've seen the qualities they want. But this leads me to believe that there may be a full-on mutiny at the command level in some of our services, if not all of them.
I think there probably is. We don't know the extent of it, but these people have grown up in the Biden regime and, picked by Obama in the early days. And so I don't think Trump was that involved in the officer corps during his first term. And so we've got a real problem. And, I have contacts with a lot of junior officers now, and I tell them stay in and lead your troops, because we're going to need really high quality, ethical leaders, warriors to rise in the ranks and save the nation. So, we got to keep pulling these people out. We have a list of them. STARS has been very effective, as you said, on the congressional level. But we got to keep the pressure up because it's not happening fast enough.
Yeah, when Obama was in, the rumor was, and I was still on active duty until late 2011, and I was a wing commander when I retired. The word on the street was that he was purging generals that had conservative viewpoints or were independent thinkers and those kind of things. And I thought it was just by attrition. But what I wanted to point out here is at no time did any of those officers or anybody in a position like mine would ever think about putting an email out to my entire base or unit, whatever I was in command of, and openly disagree with the policies of the commander-in-chief and the vice president, as spoken through the vice president, like what happened here. That's really incredible because this is not the first incident. It's just the first one where the individual was fired.
Well, I'm of the belief, I'm not a JAG or an attorney, but I think she should be court-martialed. I think I'm not sure the exact term of the crime, whether it's conduct unbecoming or insubordination or something, but at least she should be demoted in rank and dishonorably discharged. Whether there's any other punishment, there needs to be examples made of these people. It's not okay. So it's going to keep happening. And unfortunately, this kind of Maoist indoctrination has taken hold, and it's got to be ripped out. Just has to be. And maybe Hegseth needs a 1-800 number, to call in people who need to be looked at. And if the same person gets 500 calls, then maybe that person should be looked at. I don't know the procedure, but there's got to be a way to get to these people.
Well, he's about to send a DEI task force. I don't know who's on the task force out, but if it's the USD PNR people that are in the offices today that wrote these memos on the COVID-19 reinstatements, he better get some different people. But that's a good opportunity right there if he's sending them out to the bases to talk to people on the ground to get feedback from them, not just on DEI, but the command culture and the ethics of their senior officers and commanders. They could have confidential meetings with folks, some key people and everything, and just get a pulse for that. That's a great opportunity to do that. But I wondered that, does he have people that are available that are not loyal to Donald Trump, but loyal to the Constitution instead of the institution? That's what's really going on here, isn't it?
It really is. And I can remember early 1990s when there was an email sent out to the force saying, make sure even if you don't like President Clinton, you're not allowed to say a word about him. I remember that distinctly. We don't have that now. It's encouraged almost to be insubordinate, and we have to have accountability in some form or fashion, and not just there, but also in the election fraud issues, in the lawfare, in the judiciary corruption. There's a lot of problems, and it's free media accountability that's going to hold these people accountable to begin with, and that provides. I think we wrote 4 or 5 articles on CQ Brown before he was actually fired. I know that made a difference. I know they were read by the right people, and when you see that kind of pressure coming from the groundswell, people react, and that needs to keep up. And I'm glad for your and our relationship and other colleagues and professionals that we know that are concerned about, General Bishop and others that are concerned about the force, and we just got to keep pushing. The only way out is through, and there's no turning back at this point. We got to save the republic.
Yeah. What do you say to the folks that say, and I've heard this, hey, this is our team now. We gotta step lightly. I don't know that I agree with that. Look, I'm all for being respectful, even to the last administration. But I'm not for keeping my mouth shut. When I see something, I just, today, I got to say something after everything we've witnessed.
I completely agree with you. There's a difference between disrespect and telling facts. And I went after my classmate at Air Force, I'm blanking on his name now, Rich Clark, who was the soup. I went after him hard because he was lying to STARS. He was pushing the vaccines really, really hard. And I know I can't prove it, but I would bet money that several of these cadet deaths were directly related to that. And, he got a plum job at some Sports Illustrated or something. I'm not sure what it was to do with football and sports. But I took a lot of flack for that criticism, but I didn't say anything that was not true or disrespect him because of any of his individual characteristics or anything. It was just like his behavior I didn't think was honorable. And we have to say things like that, even though it's difficult. I had a gentleman who was bragging about how he got all these cluster munitions approved for Ukraine. And I'm like, do you know how many people and civilians that's going to kill? And you're bragging about this? And, we got into it, but in the end, I'm proven right. That was not a good thing, just to dump all our old weapons in that battlefield, because it's going to be generations before, if ever, these people will get over it.
Yeah, General Clark was one of my peers, too. We were all commissioned the same year group, but I flew in the B-1 with him, and that's a very small community, as you know. And I have taken a little bit of flack for speaking out. I mean, as much as I love the person as a brother, a warrior brother, and his technical skills and leadership as a squadron commander, I see the superintendent job as really a failure of the cadets, a failure of the families, and a failure of the country, because it's such a deep and abiding indoctrination that is going to affect our officer corps for generations and generations.
Yeah, for sure. I had a classmate of mine recently. I saw him at a football reunion, and I was talking about he asked me what I'm doing, and he asked me, "Are you spreading misinformation?" And I said, "What the hell is that?" I mean, I'm telling the truth. Is that misinformation? I don't know, dude.
It's interesting how our colleagues and former colleagues can look us in the eye knowing that we are well trained in planning operations, which include influence operations, deception operations, which I'm sure you and I both have used in real life and everything. And how dare they look us in the eye and accuse us of spreading misinformation when the government is on a disinformation campaign by and large. And
they're running an info op on the American people is what they're doing.
All right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I can't let you go without talking about helicopters, because you're a helicopter pilot, longtime helicopter pilot, probably the most experienced one that I talk to regularly now. Let's talk about this New York crash that occurred, killing the family from Spain, Siemens Spain, and everything, and the CEO and everything this past weekend. Look, I've heard this discussion, something called mast bumping. I'm not familiar with it. I've flown fixed wing my entire life, so I'm not familiar with that. But I saw the videos and the stills, and the tail boom completely is sheared off of the fuselage, and then there's the entire rotor set with the mast and what looks like a big chunk at the bottom of the mast. Maybe that's the transmission is coming down separately from the fuselage. What the heck do you think is going on there?
Well, my first reaction, and I wrote about this, was I flew HH-3s in Alaska for 3 years, combat rescue. We deployed all over Asia, Sikorsky. And then I upgraded to the MH-53 with special ops. And we had a constant problem with fake parts. And there's a thing on top of the mast that holds the rotor end called the Jesus nut. And it's essentially that part. If it fails, the mast separates from the infrastructure of the aircraft. My stick buddy in flight school, John Augustine, a classmate of mine, also died in a UH-1 Bell helicopter incident where the rotor system separated back in, I guess, early 90s. And my first thought was, the Jesus nut failed. I don't know. The mast bumping, you have to have a lot of turbulence for that. I flew a lot in very turbulent situations in Alaska, through the mountains, through the passes, and I've never seen a mast bumping incident, put it that way. The Bell helicopter, the design is a little different. It's not as highly, elegant as the Sikorsky rotor system, but and so that's possible, and probably more possible in a Bell helicopter. But I just what would have caused the rotor system to, or the actual rotor itself to tilt so hard to hit the mast? Usually that's extreme turbulence or pilot, not error, but almost intentional. So I don't know. The fact that the tail boom was not attached, that could have just been torque that ripped it off.
Right.
Because a helicopter it's a finely balanced machine, and if one thing gets out of balance, it just essentially eats itself. And so I can't. Maybe it was a transmission problem that sheared, a part. My first gut sense was a failed part, and there was a lot of fake parts going through that weren't machined up to the right tolerance, and just failed. And we found them all the time in the tail rotor or the Jesus nut, all over rotors system, and we would always get NOTAMs or fact caution warnings that check this, check that, but for that where the crack would show up.
Well, thanks, Todd. I appreciate it. We're out of time, unfortunately. I could do 5 shows with you on this stuff. I appreciate that. You can go on X, type in cdm.press, and all of Todd's stuff will come up. But go follow them, share their stuff, and we appreciate him coming on. Tomorrow, Todd Sheets, we're talking about tariffs and trade wars, and that should be an interesting conversation. I'm Rob Maness. I'll see you on Worldview Tube tomorrow.
You're watching Worldview 2, built on the 35 years of Worldview books, documentaries, research, high-profile interviews, and the radio and television broadcasts of Brannon House. You're watching Worldview 2, built on the 35 years of Worldview books, documentaries, research, high-profile interviews, and the radio and television broadcasts of Brannon House.